You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. In today's podcast, I talk with Niels Koppelman, founder and managing director of 3Tech, a German-based CRO agency. Niels has followed a path of developing positive customer experiences even before he went to university in Berlin. We discuss how in Germany, experimentation is still somewhat in its infancy, and how Niels is aiming to broaden the understanding that A/B testing and CRO are crucial in website design. Niels, looking at your LinkedIn, it seems like you decided that you want to go do your own thing from a very early age. Only weeks after your A-levels, you decided to go into business. What stimulated that?
I think I have to go one step back because I think that started way earlier when I was probably like 13, 14, 15. At that time, I was working in theaters as a technician, and later went on to design websites and online shops and build them, for that matter, for friends, family, and at some point also clients. And after my A-levels, I just decided to do that. Then from that point onward, I went to Berlin, I think 1.5 years later, to start my studies in university, and then built the agency here in Berlin.
Was it something that you did whilst you were still at university, or was it you kind of just parked it and then came back to it after you came out?
It was really when I was at university, I was already like building and working with clients, and that just intensified over time, and it just became my main business. For that matter, I think my studies, were in a way lacking, or I didn't put enough attention there, and so quickly over time, I shifted all of my attention to the company now.
So a lot of the people that I've interviewed on the podcasts have come from what I would describe as a very mathematical background. So they've done a degree in mathematics or a master's in mathematics, and they've kind of fallen into A/B testing, experimentation, CRO, whatever you like to call it. You did a degree, or your Bachelor of Science, in computer science. Now, that seems to be more coding, if I'm correct, than the thought of actually being able to use the aesthetics of, say, A/B testing or experimentation.
You would assume that. That was actually my assumption when I started in 2016 with the studies back then, that it would be more coding, when in fact it would the course or the courses were mostly theoretical, with some theoretical computer science, with some applications of that knowledge and skills. But yeah, actually, like from when I initially started, even before my studies, a lot of the things I was doing was quite design heavy. I wouldn't say it was pretty, but it was design heavy. So I was doing like web design and designing user interfaces. So I think over time, this just was a good combination of understanding tech stacks and understanding, to a degree, user interfaces and user experiences, and understanding how to research also, work in user studies, etc., to what we're doing now. And I think that at some point this just shifted also to then A/B testing and having the background to go deeper in that.
So what was the difference between being a freelance consultant way back in those early days to actually being the founder of your own business, which you started in 2017? Was that just a natural progression?
Um, it's a funny question, actually, because a lot of the times I am still in my head a freelancer. At least it feels like that, and like sometimes I catch myself not understanding that I actually have a team that I can delegate or ask help from. And initially, when I was working primarily as a freelancer, I was just doing everything myself, and getting outside help was initially limited by resources, but then still also limited by mindset, something I didn't do. So even now, sometimes I catch myself just doing things like working on a design for something when I could really invest my time in more effective ways and have my team handle that and they're actually like much better at things, these kind of things than I am. So I think the switch really came and is still coming sometimes when it's about more complex topics, where it's also not just where it's understanding that it's not just me anymore.
And that's obviously quite a difficult call to make, isn't it? When you've been used to doing things on your own and you think, oh, I can do this, it's very difficult to be able to hand over that responsibility to somewhere else, especially if you feel passionate about what you do, as I'm sure you do. It's always kind of tricky to be able to say, well, I'll let somebody else do that because you kind of have your little baby and you want to look after it, basically, I think is one of the things. But taking that step a little further on, you've been initiator of the CRO circle, which is presumably a place where people can get understanding about CRO experimentations, and you're building a community around that. Now, give me a little bit of explanation as to why you think that's important in a market such as the German market, because I would have thought it was fairly full of CRO expertise.
Well, I think the point is with zero circles and a lot of communities in general, that it's not just the expertise that matters, but also the community around it, being able to communicate and share ideas with others that are on the same page or that you're on the same page with. And sometimes it's just a good way of just free up your mind, come up with new ideas, see how other people are doing things. And since we're in the world of optimization also, one of the things that I'm always looking for, personally as well as in business, is like, how can I optimize, how can I improve the status quo, how can I change things for the better. And I think just being in touch with people that might be further along, as you're yourself, or it's just a cool thing. And oftentimes it's just when you're working on say a project for a client, sometimes you're just sitting there and like working on something for hours, then knowing that at the end of the week or whenever there is a chance to chat with other people that have similar topics, but maybe in a bit more relaxed environment, is yeah something I was missing. So that's why I created Zero Circle in the beginning.
So I think it's a very good thing because obviously experimentation is about ongoing improvement. And ongoing improvement is testing, then testing again, to making sure you're continually investing in what you're trying to be able to do. And I think that's probably the same when you get fresh blood, let's put it that like that, people with different ideas, as you said, with perhaps some more mature ideas that may have been doing experimentation for a bit longer, and always going and feeding yourself from those and helping you to feed others, which may not be even at the stages that you and I are at, to be able to get further on. Is there a big community of CRO specialists in Germany?
Well, it depends how you define community. I think there is circles and people are talking to one another. And I think in the UX space of things, or UX side of things, there is definitely communities. But in terms of CRO, I think the community is just starting to grow. In individual disciplines, I think there are bigger communities. But for especially the CRO side of things, there could be more that's being done. Yeah, in terms of communities and engagement and building that community. But I think, for example, in Netherlands, there is the Conversion Hotel conference every year, where, and also I'm going this year, so I'm really looking forward to that. But there is a lot more. It feels like there's a lot more community already existing, compared to Germany.
So the question I was going to ask around that is do you feel that Germany is perhaps lagging behind other areas such as the US, the UK, which have been doing experimentation? It feels like a lot longer.
Mhm. Well, it's hard to say because oftentimes it feels like companies in Germany do a lot of things, but might not be as good in communicating that. So I can only judge from what I hear and see. But for example, compared to the Netherlands, compared to the US, where also market size is a lot bigger, I'm just assuming that the communities in the space of CRO and experimentation are bigger. And to put it in to look at it from a different perspective, these communities are often driven by big companies who can do experimentation at scale, who can run a multitude of experiments. So, like, look at Booking.com in Netherlands, or Farfetch in Portugal, or other companies in the US, like the tech giants, Facebook, Amazon, etc. They are running a lot of experiments, and hence the community around that is inherently bigger, because the companies and people involved in these processes are just more than here in Germany, I assume.
Do you think there's yet to be an ethos of A/B testing or experimentation in Germany, or is it something that you just don't really understand who's doing much of it? Because obviously it has, I suppose, been in the hands of those larger organisations that you mentioned, rather than the smaller kind of organisations. But there are companies like Bosch and BMW and lots of organisations like that that are doing, I'm sure, CRO and A/B testing in Germany. Is it becoming more pervasive, or is it still just in the land of those big multinationals?
I think, especially in e-commerce, more and more companies are, and usually e-commerce companies are smaller than like the multinationals we just talked about. But I think, especially in e-commerce, where accessibility to platforms and systems, and also education is getting much easier. I think experimentation on the big scale, but also just like limited, or in a way, limited A/B testing is becoming more popular, and by that also more of a thing in the industry, that people also outside of data science accept and understand that it's like a proper way to do research and improve. Yeah.
If I look back a number of years ago when GDPR came about, Germany was very, very, I suppose, rigorously behind GDPR regulations. Do you think that reluctance to be able to interrogate people while they're on a browser is actually having an effect on those companies who potentially may wish to do some experimentation?
I think, especially in the case of Germany, where it feels like people are trying to be correct all the time, and in regard to, say, GDPR, and especially in terms of big corporations, maybe less so with smaller organizations. I think this sometimes stands in the way of experimentation, or generally in the way of growth and just trying things out. But also because um, the risks of doing things not by the law are just quite big, in
Yeah.
terms of
Yep.
monetary sanctions, for example. But I think this is also a cultural thing. I mean, I can't 100% compare it to, say, the US, but I would say there it's just much easier to say run experiments, or the data policies are. It feels like a bit looser, but not 100% sure.
So I would think one of the observations that I make here in the UK and certainly in the US is that where the initial kind of "do you accept cookie" statement that comes out on most websites, I think over here we're probably 99% of people will just click that and say, yes, I'll accept cookies. Do you think there are less people in Germany and the dark regions that are perhaps a little bit more hesitant of doing that?
It's hard to tell. I certainly know people who will spend a minute or two to find the button to actually, and then go ahead and configure the cookie settings, etc. But I think in most cases, and if we're looking at the broad, say, demographics, usually people go to a website with a goal, and they want to get to that goal as quickly as possible. They want to reach that goal as quickly as possible. So I think most people just accept and click accept, and by making it easier to then also actually accept this cookie notice or banner or consent tool or whatever it is, people are just drawn to actually do that. And like like looking through our clients, I also see that um, 60-70% of people do actually accept the cookie banner. And I think there is also a portion of people who are like browser side or client side blocking external scripts, etc. So there is also that might add bias to this statistics, but yeah.
I was reading some articles from you, and it's one of your statements is A/B testing is basically making mistakes on scale. Now, that as an introductory to trying to get somebody to do CRO experimentation seems to be a very, how would I put it, challenging statement to make. How do you get across that when you're looking at new clients to be able to take on CRO or someone like that?
Yeah, well, I think I posted that the other day, and I think this it's important to note that the second part of that statement um, was that there is one caveat, which is not repeating these mistakes. Um, so I think one crucial thing to understand, especially for people who are new to the idea of experimentation, new to the idea of CRO and A/B testing, and I'm now just going to call all these unanimously without any distinction for this conversation. But I think what's important to understand is that if you don't test things, say rolling out a feature, if you don't test this, you will never know what kind of impact it has on, say, user behavior and eventually on revenue.
And that's both
Um,
positive and negative, I assume.
that's the point exactly. So and by not testing it, you just don't know. And this is like, say you roll out 100 features over the course of a year, and this applies to all kinds of industries, not just e-commerce, of course. There is a chance that all of them or 90% of them will uh, hurt, say, your conversion rate or any other kind of metric that you have on your site or on your application. And by not testing this, you will eventually just make mistakes. But by just looking at things through the lens of A/B testing, through just analyzing that, and you can easily understand that it makes sense to run A/B tests and experiment with things, as opposed to just rolling things out, and in the end make more informed decisions about what to roll out and if it's worth rolling it out or not, and then just hopefully just roll out the things that work.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a perception, and obviously I'm in the space, and I know there is, that testing is all about winning. It's not about learning. Everybody wants to be able to say, oh, this test was successful and we saw a positive impact. But there are less and less people who look at tests which say, oh, that didn't do exactly what we wanted it to do, and looking at that in a positive view. Do you feel as though that's just a message that doesn't seem to be getting through?
Um, like this is like a core part of the message that I'm trying to spread, and I keep iterating on new ways of actually getting this message across. But for me, it's like what you're describing is the test to learn versus test to win approach. And I think as a company, you first need to understand that it's not just about winning. It is primarily about learning, and with the example I made before, understanding also what doesn't work, because then you can make more informed decisions about, or like you even find out what works. And there's this interesting and sadly very omnipresent notion of agencies, and to a degree also understandably so, but notion of agencies just pushing only their wins, only the experiments that very rarely have like
Yeah.
200% uplift or something, but don't show the things that didn't work, when really it's those things, those experiments, that are really important and crucial to the experimentation program, to the growth of the company, or of a company, because this learning, this understanding is what is preventing, say, in a way, future mistakes, and improving the experience also of a website. And this is, I think, what is test to learn, is accepting and being open to the outcome of an experiment. And then, say, if an experiment in a way fails, and I think this is the first problem with this kind of terminology, because we're talking about failed experiments as opposed to an experiment that didn't result in the outcome we expected, that we were hoping for, but then understanding why that happened. And because otherwise, say, and it goes the same way with in a way, a winning experiment, or that has a positive outcome. If you don't understand why this experiment had this outcome, then it's not really worth anything, at least not in the long term, because there's little to no way to replicate this outcome and learn from it.
But do you not think that's perceived, or the perception of that is that's a much more longer term return on investment from a company who's looking to say, okay, well, I'm heard a bit about this experimentation bit, and it's bound to do us some good. They make an investment, whether it's either through a agency or bring on somebody themselves. The idea of being able to say, actually, well, we're going to learn from those mistakes that we make as well, doesn't seem to see a good ROI. And that's always very difficult to justify when you're bringing on a technology which could be reasonably costly.
I think it's the same thing, and in or similar to what I said before, is or adding to that, actually, it's important, of course, to early on show that the program, whether it's agency or somebody in house or a team of people in house, is worthwhile, and that there is a positive ROI on the investment. But I think the fact alone that you can show, for example, that you prevented losses, which in an experiment, basically, you can, if you do it properly, you can show, by, for example, showing we didn't implement this, and by that we basically prevented, say, 100K in losses or whatever. And on the other hand, if then there's experiments that are winning, or like add to the bottom line of the company, then also showing that. And I think this quickly goes to show that experimentation and the program can have a significant value to the company, and that with a positive ROI.
At what kind of stage do you think CRO is pertinent to a business? Because lots of businesses that we see are selling what they think the customers want, but don't really understand what the customers want. How do you think they could find that out? And is that a part of the CRO process or the experimentation process?
I think I would now, especially with this question, distinguish between CRO and experimentation, for and at least to add some nuances to it.
Mm-hmm.
So in CRO, a big part is research and interacting, or at least trying to understand what users or customers really want, what drives them to make decisions. Um, and if we're not looking just at e-com, but also other kind of industries, the CRO, or user research side of things is super important. For example, in product management, product managers need to understand what users want, so they work oftentimes with research agencies or companies to get more insight into what potential customers or what the market really wants. Experimentation then is trying things out. In what form that is like depends on the company size, because your question was also like, when does it start to make sense? And the point with experiments is every company in a way is an experiment. Like you need to understand, does what we want to sell, does that have any effect on the market? Do people want to buy this from us? And if they don't, then maybe we just need to change the messaging, or we need to find a better way of selling it. Um, but it also might, one of the outcomes of that experiment might also be, oh, people are just not interested in lollipops on wheels or whatever it is, to make a funny example here. But yeah, so I guess it's just CRO and the methods behind it are crucially important for any company, and whether or not experimentation or A/B testing makes sense for them is a question of, do they have the budget for it, and and do they eventually also have the traffic, for example, to run A/B tests? Because there is, I think, a misconception of any company being able to run A/B tests, and as much as I wish that was true, it's just it is just not. And it's also important, for example, for me to and we made mistakes in the past with this, where we were running A/B tests with companies that were just too small. But one of the learnings from that was it's better to also be like just honest and like
Hmm.
transparent
Yeah.
to people about, hey, it does not really make sense to run A/B tests. One, because you're just too small and you won't really learn anything from it. But one other thing is, like, when you make the wrong decisions based on an A/B test and you think you've made the right decision, that's even worse, because then you like working with evidence that is just not, that is very biased, or it's just not, it just doesn't apply. So yeah.
I think there's always a willingness that tests are positive and they do show a return on investment. But obviously, we know from traffic volumes or low traffic volumes, it's not always applicable to be able to do that. But challenging your definition of CRO a little, I think that conversion rate optimization isn't necessarily particularly revenue driven. There are certain sites, such as B2B sites, where it's more about education and information and making sure that that information is being absorbed or at least followed in a particular way. So I think that CRO can be seen in lots of different ways, and experimentation will help CRO in being able to make that happen. But one of the challenges, I think, is that in a market which is less than mature, it's always difficult for companies or somebody inside a company to be able to raise the whole issue of investing in CRO, because there isn't this kind of, how would you describe it, this momentum inside certain markets that say, actually, experimentation CRO, let's call it the same for now, is not necessarily being used by lots and lots of people. And I use an example here. When you look at the UK market, say 3 years ago, there were very, very few CRO specialists when you looked in LinkedIn. Now there are probably 5, even 10 or 20 times more than there was in the UK. Yet I'm still finding it less easy to find CRO specialists in markets such as, well, Germany, for instance, France, for instance, certainly finding them in, as you say, in the Netherlands. But that education, I know you're using the CRO circle to do that, but it seems like it needs to gather more momentum to become much more widespread as a technology. Would you agree?
um I would 100% agree. Like I think the platforms that are um, well, not really the platforms, but the visibility of CRO in as a driver for growth, at least in how companies uh, are have access to, is like, I think, too limited just now, because it feels like it's like still a niche thing. And a lot of times I'm talking to people, and for example, they're in marketing and they've heard of CRO, but oftentimes it's just, oh yeah, that thing that big companies do.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, it's just, I think we need to do, as an industry, we need to make it more accessible to yeah. I would love to say the entire world, but that would be just a bit outrageous, maybe. But accessible to departments in, or categories of departments in companies, so it is actually seen not only as like a revenue driver, but also a way of making better data-driven decisions. And by that, maybe similarly to how frameworks like agile development is in software development, that people would understand that that experimentation is very crucial to the business, or to business in general. Just one note. You're totally right with that. CRO is not just shouldn't be just a revenue-driven discipline. I think the reason why also we make uh, these statements a lot is in regard to revenue, is because this is usually also what companies initially want.
Yes.
Like they want to see an impact on revenue, and it's a lot harder to explain that experimentation, A/B testing, zero, whatever it is in a specific case, but it can have value outside of just increasing revenue, or quote unquote increasing conversion rate, which still seems to be for a lot of people the number one thing they want, when in reality there can and certainly are other things that are relevant. But yeah, totally agree. And not every business, not every application of CRO has to be revenue driven, for sure.
One of the things that I mentioned earlier is that the UK market, for instance, is much more buoyant with regard to CRO specialists, and that's a given. But actually, I think there's a problem before that, which is the upcoming marketers which are coming out of university or business schools, or even going there, getting their what we describe as industry accreditation. Here in the UK, we have the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Experimentation doesn't seem to be sitting front and center with regard to that education process for marketers. It seems to be kind of wrapped into almost a paragraph of a section that happens to be discussing digital marketing. And yet, I think that needs to be elevated as well. And I don't know how we can do that, because obviously it's a bigger problem than the one that ourselves can grasp. But how is education around experimentation happening, if it is at all, in the German market?
It's a good question. When I studied computer science, I think I heard the term A/B testing once, maybe twice, but definitely not within the default course material. I can't really speak for all the universities or other education outlets for that
Yeah.
matter. But I definitely know that um, there is more happening in newer kinds of studies or courses. For example, we this year we hired somebody who studied e-commerce. When I started, this wasn't even a course. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't even apply for that. Um, and I think it's like economic engineering with specialty in e-commerce or something. And there was definitely topics about A/B testing, about experimentation, but also from what he described, the the awareness of these topics and like the specific knowledge is not as big, or not as good and up to date, compared to what is needed in the market. So I think future courses will need to be developed even from universities and not just from companies that sell this. And I'm not against, by no means against, courses in the commercial market, but I think there could also be more happening in general studies to make this a more accessible topic. And even if it's just two paragraphs compared to one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I think moving back to your CRO circle, I think one of the challenges that this industry seems to work in is, and I use the phrase, we're working in a vacuum. So the people that understand it get it. They value it. They obviously are educating people within their own organizations to be able to see the value of experimentation. But I think that there definitely has to be some sort of, I suppose, almost to the point of saying it's as essential as Google Analytics to be able to drive what's being driven to your website to convert that into something which is maybe revenue generated, maybe at least a conversion generation. And I think that's where lots of people are finding it much more difficult, because there isn't this big news about CRO all the time. You have to be in it to understand it. And I think it's still seen as one of those things that, yeah, that's a specialist subject. I need to get somebody in to be able to do that. And that sounds expensive, as it always is at the beginning of every market where there is vagueness or lack of understanding. The perception is it's too expensive for us to do now. And I think we'll probably have to do a better effort into be able to explode that myth that it actually could be very much revenue positive, rather than just a cost on the business. Nils, it's been good. We're running out of time. I think one of the things that, in order to help educate that, is perhaps we get you in touch with one of our directors, Sandeep Shah, that perhaps talk about what I would describe as a no sales talk conversation in your CRO circle, if that's up for it, because I think there is a lot of education. We've been in the market for a long time. Sandeep has been in the market for a very long time. And so it might be helpful for us together to be able to educate more people with regard to the value of experimentation, and actually, come through some of the pitfalls that we've come across, I think. So we've got a lot of expertise, and I'm sure Sandeep would be happy to put that forward. But for now, Nils, it's been a great conversation. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure
Thank
we'll
you.
speak again.
Yes, let's do that. And generally, just one last comment on that. I think any if it's in CRO circle or even other kinds of contexts, I think it's super valuable to help people understand. And I mean, I think people in CRO circle are certainly aware of these topics, but even there, just adding more awareness and insights from various different angles is just adding value to this community, and I hopefully to other communities as well. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Thanks for having me on the show, and yeah.
That's no problem, Mills. We'll touch base in the next day or so with regard to introducing you to Sandeep. But for now,
Sure.
thanks a lot.
All right. Have a good day. I appreciate it.